Welcome to Year 3 of the Funding Love podcast with Mal and Kate. We are two adoptive moms that seek to love, support, and elevate all corners of the adoption triad while running our nonprofit Funding Love.
In Year 3, we will be talking all about parenting, Disney, adoption, and more with an all-star lineup of incredible guests, both inside and outside the adoption community.
So grab your favorite beverage and pull up a chair,
because everyone has a seat at our table.
Together, we are Funding Love,
the podcast.
Hi, Funding Love podcast family. We are back for our second week of our second book in our book club series with You Should Be Grateful by Angela Tucker. If you missed last week's episode, be sure to go back and tune in to the first part of our conversation. This week, we are picking up where we left off for the rest of our conversation on this amazing book. We hope you enjoy it.
One thing I want to talk about too, because it's my book is open to it, so I'm going to bring it up before I forget, is the idea in the book is that Angela is has been her whole childhood really concerned about finding her birth mother and like thinking about her birth mother and what it would be like to reunite with her birth mother, what her birth mother thought, what it would be like to live with her birth mom. All of this is so consumed. And then she wants to find her. She's so focused on it that she didn't realize that she wasn't even thinking about finding her birth father. Because when she got to a point where she's like, oh, the search kind of like hit a dead end, she couldn't seem to find her. Somebody was like, hey, maybe you'll find your birth dad. And she's like, oh my gosh, why didn't I ever? And she kind of had that thought of, why was I only thinking about that? So I wanted to have that conversation just because I do know Mallory and I have talked about this before of how there is a lot of more conversation from even our children not even asking about their birth fathers. And I don't know if that's because I don't know why that necessarily would be. It's because they've actually seen their birth mothers and we've talked to them and we communicate with them, and so it's not in their head. Or
or is it easier to understand because you can see that babies grow in mommy's tummies?
So I'm curious about how that conversation for you guys, as an adoptee, Allison, and as a birth mom, Jessie, like where your opinions would be on that, or maybe how we can foster that to create more of a conversation around that they're interested in, because I brought it up and there's almost no interest either too. So you'd let it go, I guess, but it's interesting.
Well, I will talk about one thing, but it's more, so culturally, that's some of it, right? That, especially when think about like the baby scoop era, and basically the man would just vanish, and then the woman was sent away, and it was just it was a whole big thing. So I think we're not actually that far out from that, right? We're not that far away from the baby scoop era, and so I think there is still some of that. And I will say, to give credit to the two generations below me that are now raising kids, because I'm a Gen Xer, that the fathers are so much more involved. And so I do see that paradigm shift. I think that we will be in a point where young adoptees will be asking more about the father, and birth fathers will be demanding more of their rights. It's just culturally, for the longest time, the mother was more important.
Yeah.
So I think there's some of that and they may not even know it subconsciously. There might just be some of that, because we say things like, oh, a mother's love, the nurture of a mother, like just in society, we say these things that still represent that. Instead of like, oh, a father's love, he's so nurturing. Like, when do you hear nurturing father? When there are many nurturing fathers. So I do think that there's some of that. Obviously, I think encouraging it as much as you can, again, in these casual ways. So like what Jessie was saying is like, if you see, especially if you have a relationship with their birth father, and you see a characteristic that looks similar, right? Like, oh my gosh, when you just did the hand motion, that looked like the last time we saw your birth father. He goes like this a lot. Like, that's cool. And like, that's it, right? That's all that conversation needs to be. Or like for me, actually, what I find is when I compliment our daughter, that I will be like, wow, your hair is beautiful. It looks just like your mom. You know, like stuff like that.
Mm.
Now we don't say birth mom, but that's just our family. She just has two moms.
Yeah.
And so now our case, we are not connected with the birth father. He's not in that place yet. But hope to in the future. But yeah, I think it's just about connecting, talking about them, keeping them still real and present in their world. And you know, just like another family member that you love dearly but that lives far away and just don't see as often, you just want to keep that person in their memory, in photo albums in the house, in you know in framed photos in the house, even you know things like that, to like keep that connection going. That would be my suggestion.
Yes. And I thought that the ironic and kind of cool part to that story was that when she found her birth father, she writes in the book over and over. And there's just like elements of it that were too ironic that I didn't believe her for a second. She was like, and I walked into a coffee shop and they said, "Oh my gosh, you look just like Sandy." And then I walked somewhere else and I had multiple people telling me I look just like Sandy. And I Googled, I said, Sandy the Flower Man from Chattanooga, because she writes in her book and, you know, he was like this famous figure. And so I Googled it and she does. She looks just like Sandy. So I thought it was so funny that this guy that she didn't even think to look for, not only did he look and like, just like physically, you could tell he was her birth dad, but he also just like right away turned and embraced her and was like, "Yeah, this is my daughter." Like all over town, "Hey, this is my daughter. My daughter. I didn't know I had a daughter, but she's my daughter." And was so proud of her. And I liked seeing their small and short relationship that they got to build. That she never even thought of, you know, that it wasn't even in her mind, but that was sitting there like waiting for her, you know. So I thought that was really cool.
And the wonderfulness for an adoptee of being recognized that we physically look like somebody else is indescribable to people that are not adoptees. And the one thing I will say with this reunion, because I will talk a little bit about my reunion, I do not talk about that on podcasts. It's usually in my like write up. Do not ask me about my reunion. I will talk about it today because this book was very helpful, because a lot of people only see the Lifetime Hallmark movie version of reunions. So just to kind of add on to, you know, what Mal was saying, around that, you know, connected immediately with her dad. He immediately was like, "You're my daughter. I can tell," you know, whatever. Then he helped her to find her birth mom, who opened the door to her house and said, "No, I don't have a daughter. I don't want to meet you. I'm not interested." And the quote from Angela, that it's important for everyone to hear this, because again, I'll talk about my reunion. Her quote was, "This pain could not be intellectually rationalized away." It's I think that people, and I say that like broadly, right? Especially a lot of people outside of the adoption community, imagine that reunion is going to be wonderful. And even sometimes, like I've been on podcasts that are run by adoptees, and they will also be like super encouraging of me to meet other family members. But when you have a tough reunion like that, it is extremely difficult to want to continue to open yourself up to this kind of pain that cannot be intellectually rationalized away. And there are extra components, and this is where like I know that, you know, Jesse can add from like the birth mom's perspective, but especially thinking about my age and what they were telling birth moms back then, like they have a better life. You need to forget that you had a child. That, you know, I even come from the era of they did not likely let my birth mother hold me. And so it's like from that perspective, these birth moms have been like telling themselves to survive, right? To mentally survive through this. They're better off without me. No one can know. And it's like this big secret that's unveiled when we come reach out to them. And that was kind of what it was in the beginning for her. And I'll let Jessie talk about her thoughts on this, and then we can talk about that reunion as it continued to unfold. But Jessie, what were your thoughts on that piece?
Well, I first want to say that I don't think reunion is talked about in the adoption space enough. Like you said, we see like these Hallmark movies where there are these fantasy reunion stories and everyone's happy, but that's a lot of times not what happens. And while I'm not quite there yet in my semi-open kind of adoption, I'm sure one day that I will have to experience my own type of reunion, and have to navigate that. But the reality of the situation is I can do everything right. As adoptive parents, you can do everything right, and the reunions still fall flat. I could do everything right in my own adoption and my child still not want to have a relationship with me, and I have to accept that. But like we kind of touched on in the ghost kingdoms, if we build up these expectations, and especially for birth mothers, our ghost kingdom might be really weathered. It might be really beat up because we were told all of these things that our child would have a better life. We can't provide them anything. What do we have to offer, our children? And so we become so small over these years that when reunion happens, we've closed ourselves off so much that the shame is hard to work through. And shame can have such a stronghold over our lives. I know for me, that played a big role in denial. And so if you've lived 25, 30 plus years and haven't told anyone, and were told to pretend this never happened, move on with your life, your child's in a better place, you're going to shut that off and you're going to shut that down. And so I imagine that that's probably what happened to her. I mean, I see it a lot, and it's devastating for everyone. I can't imagine what her mom might have been feeling during that time, because I guarantee she probably didn't deal with a lot of her emotions before then. And so what I see in reunion situations is, for birth mothers, a lot of times the ones that are looking forward to reunion, they almost hope that reunion is what heals them. So they don't do any of the hard work until they get to reunion. And then that brings up even more feelings of maybe regret or whatever it is. And then when it doesn't turn out the way that they had hoped, now they've got to deal with all of the emotions that they didn't deal with before, plus reunion emotions. And that can be a lot to handle. And I mean, that's just very difficult to start a relationship with, essentially strangers. Especially in these close adoptions, like, these are strangers. You do not know each other, yet you're so intimately connected. And you have to do a lot of the hard work beforehand to be able to accept reality, and we talk about grief a lot, obviously, in adoption. And the issue with a lot of birth parents and even adoptees is the feelings of ambiguous loss. There's nothing is final. And so the grief cycle of adoption is cyclical in nature or repetitive in nature. And so you're going to experience all of these feelings over and over and over as you grieve the different milestones, or you grieve the relationship that you thought you were going to have. But if you can come to a place of acceptance, you're going to be able to better tolerate the emotions that come with reunion, or the emotions that come with unexpected grief. And so we've got to do the hard work from the beginning, so that, again, that transition is so much easier. And so the conversations that we're having about reunion if you're an adoptive parent, start in adolescence. And so those are the types of relationships, what are you building with your child? What racial mirroring do you have for your child? What community are you building for your child? Not just the conversations we're having. What else are you doing to cultivate these different relationships? I love that her family brought them to different volunteering opportunities with Unhoused, knowing, that most likely, their biological family were still in similar predicaments, and so they wanted them to kind of get used to people in all walks of life, so that they weren't so disconnected from their birth families' realities,
Yes.
so that they could connect with them a little bit easier. So again, that connection starts so early, and your child is not too young to think
Yeah.
about these things or talk about these things.
But from both perspectives, I just got to say, this is where like the culture, I should say, or even, I mean, I've heard this, people say this to me, Allison, like for you, you're saying that that feeling could not like be described, but you should be grateful. Right? So that's where that whole, like this whole book, the whole idea of this, well, you should be grateful though, because you have a great family and you have all this. And then Jessie too, for you, well, you know her, so you should be grateful.
Right.
And I've
Right.
heard people say that to me where they'll ask me how like Libby's birth mom is. I'm like, she's good. She's going through some tough times. She's like shared with me. I'm so thankful she shared with me. They go, yeah, but you at least let her see her. So I mean, that's great. I'm like,
Right.
that doesn't like discount everything else, So I love that. Like you should like that term is you should be grateful though. I mean, I love this book so much because
Right.
it says it. And then what she says about like, yes, I love my adoptive parents, but I wish I wasn't adopted.
Right.
Yes.
Like
Exactly,
you
that you
can
can
live in
have
both of those.
that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Yep.
And for me, I'm sitting here listening to all of these. It's so thought provoking. I love that you share your story inside of it too,
Mm.
Jessie, because in funding love and doing what we do in the post adoption support space, it's so funny to even see donors, like donors that give
Mhm.
decent amounts to funding love. They will be one sided or the other. They'll be like, well, I'll just can I just give to the adoptive family vacations because they don't get the birth mom side, or I love what you do for women. I want to give to the birth mom stuff, and they don't see the impact that they play on each other, and that how important post adoption care is for a birth mom so that she can get into a good space, so that adoptee has the ability to come to her in a healthy space. Like, you are supporting adoptees when you're supporting birth moms, because you're helping her to come to a place to where she can have a relationship with her child, or be open to that. And I just feel like it's also interconnected, and yet still people want to categorize in their brain the three different corners of the triad and act like that they don't impact one another post placement. Like, once finalization happens, well, then it's just they go take care of their own business. They go take care of their own business. And adoptees, you should be grateful. Like, it just, this book completely shatters all of that.
Shatters
It
it.
shows how interconnected and interwoven all sides of the triad are.
Yeah. And we hear similar themes in the birth mother community. Not necessarily you should be grateful you're adopted, obviously, but we accept the bare minimum in open adoptions. And I see it in forums and conversations all the time, especially those who maybe have a good adoption story. And when I say good, and they might just have open contact. Maybe they don't see their
Yeah.
child, but they'll
Right,
just kind of
right.
be, I guess I should be thankful that they
Mm.
messaged me on her birthday, or whatever it is. And
Right.
it's like, why have we gotten so used to accepting the bare minimum? And that's what I hear when I hear people say you should be grateful. That to me, that you're saying you should be grateful to accept the bare minimum.
Yes.
And
Right.
one of the things that I highlighted, again, like we're still caught up in the beginning of this book because it's just so good, but she says, what complicated matters for me and stunted my courage to rebuke strangers who pleaded that I show more gratitude for my adoption was the weightiness of the confession, I wish I wasn't adopted, and the impossibility of explaining that it is both, and that it both is and isn't as serious as it sounds. And I love that, because sometimes I think it's so easy to write off adoptees and birth parents as angry when we're talking about maybe some of the unfairness in adoption. And it's like, it's really not that big of a deal. I'm really not as angry as I sound. Like, if you spend any time with like adoptees or birth parents, that like we're really not like wallowing in pain and in self-pity and woe is me all the time. It's just, it is what it is. But people just get really uncomfortable. So I love that she stated that. It is serious, but it's also really not that serious, because this is our life. We don't know any different. Like, adoptees don't know any different. So they don't have anything to compare it to. So yes, it is their entire life being adopted, but because they don't know any different, it's really, it's both, both a big deal and a not a big deal. So don't be intimidated by like our feelings and the questions and us trying to understand the complexities of it all, because it's hard to wrap our minds around. It's hard to wrap anyone's mind around. But yeah, don't be intimidated by these hard conversations, and instead lean in. And if you don't have the answers, that's okay. You can say, I wish I had the answer for you. I wish I knew what to say, to make you feel better or to encourage you. Thank you for sharing me. I mean, you don't always have to have an answer. And I think that maybe falls back on the ghost kingdom. We want answers. And so as adoptive parents, you don't always have to have an answer for your child if you don't know it. The worst thing you could do is lie to them,
Right.
It's also okay to say, I don't know. And I'm sorry that I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, in this book, she talks about, I hope I'm saying it right, the Sondersphere, and she's saying that this is like the real life antidote to the ghost kingdom. So basically, I think I'm understanding this right, is that every person in an adoptee's life has a place. So it fills it in so that their story feels whole. That's the way that I'm understanding it. It's their own like sphere of everybody in their story, like fitting in, whether it be a cousin from from your birth family, or this or this or this. And I think this speaks to the importance of open adoption for the adoptee, in that seeing that they all can fit in and have a place. And then, like you're saying, is the antidote to the ghost kingdom. That hopefully, that's how I'm understanding it from y'all's perspective. I mean, let's see if we can help define this better, because I actually had to read through this part a couple times. I'm like, I want to understand this, because it felt like some of the words were like jumbly, so I had to read through to kind of understand this. But that's how I picture it. So like for my daughters, like as they meet people in their family, they fill it in. And so then it makes sense to them, and whether their story or their identity or something starts to like become whole. I don't know. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I think this is something that, I mean, this is why ancestry.com even exists, and people that don't have adoption in their story, you still want to know. But to like sum up what you said, I have it right in front of me, so I'll read that, and then I really want to hear Allison's take on it. But she says, ultimately, this is what the Sonda sphere offers adoptees: a life free of the ghost kingdom fantasies that shackle them to this day, a life based on real relationships, not typewritten yellowing pages, a life of belonging. Because she talks about how all she had was just what she had from her adoption, the paperwork.
Yeah.
So take it away, Allison. Let's hear your perspective on that.
I completely agree. I completely agree. I mean, and to go to the paperwork, I remember her, or like in reading it, her saying that she was just clutching to this paperwork, right? And then it was getting like faded and stuff. Same. I mean, it sounded like she even had a little bit more than I mean, I had one page with like 3 paragraphs, so it didn't even fill the page. Like there's part of that too that's like, oh, but yeah, I mean, that's what I'm trying very hard to do for our daughter. That's what we are trying to do for our daughter. Even like meeting extended family of the birth family, like that's really important. Including them when it comes to different things, right? So like when school pictures come in, I send the school pictures of both of my daughters, right?
Yeah.
So that it's like they're just part of the family. And it really starts to fill in the gaps. And if you think about Angela Tucker, if she had met her mom first, her mom did not look anything like her. So you get to that part of the book, right?
Yeah.
And she didn't look anything like her. So there may have been a gap that wasn't filled, but like by meeting the dad, that kind of filled that gap. And then she got to meet aunts and uncles and like a whole bunch of people on her dad's side. And you could like feel it as she was writing about it in the book, that like the more people she met, the more her story was being shaped. And so that's why I think that it's important for adoptive parents when it comes to their kids. And that's why it's as Jesse said before, like we tend to talk about it as the adoption triad, but it is the adoption constellation.
Yeah.
There are many impacted by this: siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, etc. So from my perspective, I thought that was great. The one thing I wanted to make sure that we talked about in this, with the searching and with the reunion, was how important a role her adoptive mom played in it.
And
Yes.
so for anyone that hasn't read the book, Angela's biological mom, so her birth mom, his name is Deborah. And so the phrase that I thought was important for adoptive parents to hear is, while searching for Deborah, my relationship with my mom strengthened.
Mm.
And so that's because, and she found out later, and you guys kind of already touched on this, she found out later that her mom had many mixed emotions. Was like, I'm so nervous for Angela. What if she gets disappointed? I cannot see my daughter be heartbroken. All of these things. And she kept it to herself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
that is very, very important. And I have never related more to that. So because my mom did the same thing, right? When I searched for my birth mom, my mom did the same thing. It was just very supportive. And what do you need? And in fact, she wrote a letter, like a thank you card and a letter for her when I met her, that she wanted me to give to her, but she didn't put any pressure that she wanted to be there to meet her. You know what I'm saying? So like, she encouraged it, but then also kind of stepped away and let me have the space in that. And that's really, really important. And like I said, I didn't actually understand how that felt until, and I will really limit what I say because people do not know about this particular story, but my brother, who's also adopted and not genetically the same, it's just always the question we get. I just answer it before people ask. He did one of the either Ancestry or 23andMe, and a family member reached out to him, and he started talking with them and started having a connection. Well, this family member was a sister. And I felt in the pit of my stomach because we're the only two. He's all I got, right? And I felt jealousy in the pit of my stomach as an adoptee. That's why I wanted to share this. This is important. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, and all I said was, I'm so happy for you, and I am here for you, because I did not have a good reunion, and I'm not still necessarily in touch with them, but it's not like, not in a bad way. Same thing. It's not bad. It's not good. It was just more in the middle where I didn't expect it to be.
Yeah.
And so what I said to him is, if it goes, in a way that you don't want, I am always here to support you. And encourage us. So he actually still to this moment, and he never listens to my podcast, so we're safe. But to this moment, he does not know that I felt that jealousy, because I
Yeah.
did not want him to feel anything other than excitement to meet people that he had DNA similar to. Right. And so I can kind of understand how that would feel as an adoptive parent. Like, you're like, oh my goodness. Okay. Like, I wasn't ready for this, because the searching it might not have, so sometimes it might happen slow. Sometimes it might happen just that fast. It might be like, they go out, they do a DNA test, and then it's like immediate, or somebody else finds them or something. So yeah, but I think that the helping for Angela, the fact that her mom held in those feelings, they got closer and closer during the connection while finding all of this birth family.
And Angela said if she would have known that her mother felt that way, she would not have continued the search like she did.
Right.
Because
Right.
this just goes back to that adoptees aren't searching because they're trying to replace their adoptive parents. They're totally separate things, and I think that is important to talk about.
Yes.
And as an adoptive mom, like where I am now, granted my girls are young, but if I were to be experiencing that now, I don't know if I would feel like a replacement fear. A lot of my fear really would come from, like, I'm afraid of what's going to happen. Like,
Sure.
with like you're talking about the reunion, or is there going to be disappointment? Is there going to be hurt?
Disappointment, sadness, loss.
Sadness,
Yeah.
all of that, you protect. Now, there probably would be jealousy, if I'm just being honest, because I'm human. But we have an open relationship, so thankfully that is
Yeah,
not the
I
case.
think
But
that the jealousy and the fear is something that's hard to identify in the mirror. And so a lot of
yeah,
like adoptive moms' knee-jerk reaction is like, I would be jealous, but it totally is there. They just don't want to say it out loud because it sounds so bad. But there are two little parts in here that kind of talk about this that I feel like lean towards the adoptive parents and how we really do need to lean into this, because she did say that her mom confessed that she had fears that Deborah would replace her. I think that's a natural thing. I don't think we need to be that's just a natural human emotion. I don't think we need to be
For
ashamed
your
of that.
loved
I think
ones.
the
Yeah.
point is not to
Mhm.
lean into that. And it says that sometimes adoptive parents react with rigid boundaries, control, and power over birth families, and they're functioning from their reptilian brain, treating birth family as a threat rather than tapping into reasoning and judgment of their modern brain and knowing that, like, supporting your adoptee, it's not going to drive a wedge between you and your child by supporting them. That's
Yeah.
not that doesn't even make sense when you say it out loud. By supporting you in this, it's going to drive a wedge between us. It's actually quite the opposite, even though your body tells you that it's not right. But then I loved in an earlier quote, she says that any innovations or changes to adoption, particularly those impacting adopted minors, happen at the sole discretion of adoptive parents.
Yeah.
And I think that adoptive parents need to realize the power that we hold in the choices that we make while raising our children. Like, it really is, um, it's so, so important, the things we choose, the words we use, the way we're available to them emotionally, the way we encourage and support them in their search for their adoptive family, or even, I mean, my son doesn't have to search for his his biological family. He knows them, but my support in him having a relationship with them, because you can know them and have an open adoption, but still, like this other quote said, have so many rigid boundaries or like fear-based control rules
Yeah.
about how they're allowed to contact you or when they're allowed to contact them, that you're still just driving that wedge, even if it's subconsciously, you don't realize that it's happening.
Yeah.
And I
And I
I oh, sorry. I
no, I was just gonna bounce off Mallory how she
Oh, can y'all hear her?
Nope. We lost you, Jesse.
We lost you, Jesse. You might have went mute.
I see you. Can't hear you. Uh-uh.
Oh no.
Okay.
Something come unplugged.
Good man.
There
There
we
we go.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Pick it back.
The switch. I think people wait to feel okay with things before they commit to it. And so for adoptive parents, I think they're like, oh, well, I'll know when I'm ready, when I no longer feel jealous or whatever, some of the things that you were talking about, Mallory. And I think it's okay to feel those things. It's normal to be apprehensive about something that we don't know, especially when it comes to our children. But again, she did such a good job. Angela Tucker's mom did such a good job of instilling that confidence in them when they were younger that she almost didn't even need to explain, like, things might not be the way that you want them to be. Because again, she had come to such a good place of acceptance, I think, in her own story and in her own adoption. But it wasn't just the fact that she didn't know that her mom felt that way because her mom didn't utter those words. She didn't even pick it up off of her mom's like
Yeah.
tone or some of the things that she maybe talked about at home. So she went, how many years was it? 25 when she got connected to her family, 25 years and had no clue that her mom felt that way.
Right.
And
Or
that's
even in
because her
her
mom did not project it
body
onto
language, yeah.
anything. Yes. And so while you might not have uttered those words, adoptive parents talking to you, like, oh, well, I've never said that. It makes me uncomfortable. I'm like, yeah, but adoptees and
They know.
Allison,
Yeah.
they know, and they know more than I think adoptive children or biological children know. You guys are so perceptive because you had to be from such a young age. Biological children, we don't have to do that. And so we're going to pick up on these things, or they're going to pick up on things more than you think they are.
Yeah.
And so you have to be just really, really, really careful about how you're handling these conversations and your behaviors and your tones and the eye rolls and the facial expressions, because all of those things are going to be picked up on.
But even going to like the transracial conversation, like embracing culture, doing that is all a part of instilling that confidence in your child as their story unfolds and as they find out more. And Mallory, like you mentioned before, they would take their children and volunteer for those who lived in poverty because they knew a part of Angela's birth mother story was poverty. It was written on there. So I think that is all her putting together and feeling okay with it or learning it or just that level of confidence in her parents supporting her story in that. Like, I think all of those pieces are there, and never was there that like, but yeah. Well, this book, like we've all said, was so good. So if you are listening and haven't read, pick it up. You will finish it in like a day and a half. Like if I would have had the time and didn't have two small children, I probably would have sat down and finished it in one day. But it is really good. Even if you, like you said, like the adoption constellation, if you are a grandmother to an adopted child, or you are some you are going to pick up something from this.
Yes.
We, I've been in the adoption space now not too long, but I talk to a lot of adoption professionals. I'm surrounded by, adoptees, birth moms. I've read books. This still got me in a lot of ways.
Yes.
So I think it is definitely a worthy read. But any final thoughts before we wrap this conversation? Anything that we would need to touch on?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about, so we kind of stopped it in our conversation about like when Deborah, the birth mom, rejected her the first time.
Yes.
But Deborah did finally open up, and they did have a relationship. And actually I believe they still do. And there are components of all of this that are, it's so complex, right? So with reunions, the part that other folks outside of adoptees don't really fully understand is that, well, number one, they're not Lifetime Hallmark movies, right? So they are not, it usually isn't some perfect thing where the person that looks just like you comes out and gives you a hug, right?
Yeah.
She found out that, there was homelessness, there was drug addiction, there's a lot of stuff. And there is, I can't think of what the word would be called. It's not like survivor's guilt, but like this weird feeling like, okay, I grew up in this different world, but is that even where I was supposed to grow up? And now I have this whole different view of life than I would have had. Because even her regular life, so Deborah came out to visit her, and Deborah was like she even had a panic attack at one point because it was too much. Their worlds were so very, very different. And that was kind of more of my reunion. I mean, not so much like that, but it's, things are not what you expect, and they're not, reunions are not as clear cut. And so I just want to kind of prepare that for any adoptees listening, or anyone else in the constellation, that it is quite difficult on the adoptee. Ghost kingdoms or no ghost kingdoms. In my situation, it was just very strange because she did not look like me in the slightest. I am very short. She is tall. I have a very long nose. She has a button nose. I stared at every feature of her, and I could find zero in common. I could have found a stranger at the grocery store that looked more like me. She was lovely. She was fine. But I left, and I had only wanted one meeting because I didn't want to totally ruin her life. And we did stay in touch over the phone for a bit after that. But it was very weird. I actually couldn't talk to anyone for about 2 weeks after the reunion. Not my best friend, not my mom, not anyone, because I was disappointed. I had zero expectations. It was nice to have said that I met my birth mom, but I think because she didn't look like me, it felt like, did the adoption agency just pull one over on me again? Because that's what you're used to seeing. Like, I was used to going to church, and we had this family where they just had tons and tons of kids, right? I think they actually only had 3, but it felt like they had tons. They took up like the whole field, right? And they all looked the same. Even the husband and wife kind of looked the same. And I just would be like, wow, that's so crazy. Like how similar they look to their family. And then to not see that, and without knowing I was expecting it. Like I just went in, and my whole goal was I was reaching the same age that she was when she placed me for adoption. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I had a good life. Right. And she was comforted by that. And it was a lovely conversation. Again, a lovely conversation with what felt like a total stranger that didn't resemble me at all. And so that's the thing, again, to also be prepared as these other people that this is a lot for an adoptee. Let the location of a reunion be where they want it. Let them kind of drive it. I was shocked that she was so willing, Angela Tucker, and these things to just go with him to his family. And she was just surrounded by these aunts and uncles. And for me, I would have been like, this is too much. Like, can we meet in an open air place like a park or something? Because I would feel claustrophobic. But she enjoyed it. And that's the only piece that I just wanted to say, because so often we paint things with we put on rose-colored glasses. We paint a pretty picture of things. Adoption is complex. Yeah. Reunion is complex. So I think keeping all of that in mind, but in the end, for me, it did fill a gap. And it filled in more of my sondosphere, or however you say it, around me. And it did benefit me, and I got to learn some really cool information about my birth family that I did not know, even though, again, I did not see a reflection.
Yeah. And just to cap that off, Angela talks about the same thing as when she was in that room with her birth family. She couldn't stop staring at her birth father, trying to pick up on every little thing that was her. She just stared and stared and stared, and everything about him, and even her aunts and things. It was so to hear you say that, and also just say that you stared at your birth mother in that way of just searching is without realizing that you were looking for that, just speaks to that biological need. Yeah, without even having known. Yeah. So this was a great conversation. Do you have anything else, Mal? It looks like you're going to say something.
I did. I just wanted to also say from the adoptive parent perspective of this sondosphere idea, because we've addressed and we've touched on, I feel like adoptive parents can come from such a place of fear in the open adoption area, of being afraid to connect with the biological family and what that's going to look like. And that, we aren't very open to it. Even when we know that there's hard things there. I can't remember who was it that said it, but they were you'll go to a family reunion with the uncle that you know is an alcoholic. So why can't you just, you can have healthy boundaries with people that aren't healthy for the sake of your child just filling in their sondosphere. You're not saying they're going to spend the night over at their house, and you're not saying that they're going to have, daily conversations with them, but you're saying that you're allowing those gaps to be filled in. And I think that too, in having an open relationship with my son's birth mother, I think that and I would like for you to close it out with you filling in a little bit too, Jesse, of the fear of adoptive parents and the controlling the information. Because I know that my son's mom loves when we include pictures of his siblings, and loves when we include pictures of his grandparents or his aunts. So it's not just well, here's information about him, but filling in hers as well. So he knows she knows the world that he's living in, that his grandmother loves to sew, and that, his great grandmother carves pumpkins with him. So it kind of she knows his life too, the sondosphere going the other way, so that the birth mom ghost kingdom can be filled in too, of I know how he spends Christmas. This is what they do on Christmas morning, because I saw the pictures of him opening presents with his siblings. So I think that it just comes down to getting rid of that fear-based place, and not reacting from a fear-based place, but a place of knowing your boundaries and being wise, obviously, but really not letting the fear impact the decisions that you make for your child, and helping to put their growth and their future as the reason and the why, and keeping them at the center of it. So, do you feel that way too?
Yeah. I kind of touched on earlier, don't use protection as a scapegoat for your insecurities. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable in adoption. adoption. This is weird. Adoption is weird and it's uncomfortable, especially at the beginning. I mean, if you're an adoptive parent, you're at the beginning of your journey and you're hearing us talk about all these different stories and maybe you've read this book. Those first couple of years are weird because you're getting to know each other. You're strangers. You don't know anything about each other except for probably kind of the worst things, to be honest. And so, which is also not very fair. I mean, they knew all of my dirty laundry, but I didn't know any of their dirty laundry. I just saw the pretty pictures that they posted in their profiles.
Right.
And so, you guys know all of our dirt. We don't know anything about you. Yet we are trusting you with our child. And you have to remember that we are trusting you with our child. And then you have to remove the ownership from it. And if you can come together as one and recognize that it's, not mine and yours or whatever, and set those boundaries if you need to, and establish a organic relationship and one that's not just sending updates and pictures of the child, but getting to know each other as individuals. And so one of the things that I've loved so much about my own adoption is I've been able to get to know my daughter's adoptive mom really well. And we've had a lot of time to be able to get to know just each other. And we've been able to laugh. And I mean, I can confidently say that we're friends. And so that feels really good because I feel valued outside of the child that I've brought into this world. And just get used to being uncomfortable and really ask yourself, am I doing this to protect my child or am I doing it to protect my own feelings? And I read something somewhere about a family. They were talking about post-adoption contact agreements and saying how they wish that they hadn't set such hard boundaries about how the family needed to be sobered for visits because the parents passed. And the child was adopted through foster care. And it's like the child didn't know anything different. They weren't unsafe. We could have easily met with them at a playground, in a way. Obviously, if things got uncomfortable or weird, then they would have to do what they need to do to keep the child safe. But they regret having those boundaries because then child never saw the family again. And I had never considered something like that before. So really think about why you're setting these boundaries and what you can do to cultivate confidence in your child as they try to navigate their dual identities. So
love it.
Love that. That is so important to know. Well, thank you both, Allison and Jesse, for being a part of this book club conversation, because I think this has been a great conversation, very eye-opening, and I knew I was going to personally gain a lot from hearing both your perspectives as well. But hey, that's a wrap on book number 2. So we didn't even get a chance yet to talk about what book number 3 is going to be. So check out the social media because that's where we're going to post it on the Funding Love Instagram, what our next book is. And I hope you read along with us. So thank you, ladies, truly, for being a part of this. This has been so much fun.
It's great.
Thank you. And that's a wrap on this episode. So we'll see y'all soon. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Funding Love podcast. We are a crowd-funded nonprofit, which means that people like you can help make a lasting impact in the lives of adoptive families and birth moms. At Funding Love, we create post-adoption experiences that strengthen bonds, build community, and restore people. And when you partner with us, whether that is giving online, signing up to become a monthly donor, or simply buying merchandise from our shop, you are funding love.